In the isolated valleys of rural Montana, the town of Redwood Pines was home to a community, both tight-knit and wary of outsiders. It was here, amid the sweeping expanses of wilderness, that Elijah Blackwood had created his sanctuary, the commune called New Dawn. Elijah, a man in his mid-40s, had arrived in Redwood Pines a decade earlier. With his striking appearance, tall, with piercing blue eyes and a voice that carried an almost hypnotic quality, he quickly captivated the locals. His message was simple yet profound: salvation through unity and divine purpose. What began as a modest group of seekers evolved into a devout following, a congregation that had come to view Elijah as a prophet sent to guide them to a higher plane of existence. Elijah's charismatic presence masked a calculating mind. He was born in a small town in Pennsylvania and had wandered through various religious and spiritual communities before establishing New Dawn. Despite his many aliases and the rumors of his controversial past, he managed to project an image of purity and divine insight. His followers, ranging in age from their 20s to 60s, were drawn to his promise of a life free from worldly suffering and imbued with eternal enlightenment. Among the faithful were Sarah and David Mitchell, a couple in their early 30s who had moved to New Dawn, seeking solace from the turmoil of their former urban life. Sarah, a former social worker with a compassionate demeanor, and David, a mechanic with a quiet strength, were among the more committed members of the cult. Then there was Emily Cole, a bright but troubled young woman of 22, who had joined the commune after leaving behind a strained relationship with her family. Each member had their own story of desperation and hope that led them to the sanctuary of New Dawn. As the weeks leading up to the final command unfolded, the atmosphere in New Dawn grew increasingly tense. Elijah had been preparing his followers for what he called the Ascension, a spiritual journey that he claimed would elevate them to a divine plane of existence. His sermons became more urgent and feverish, filled with apocalyptic imagery and promises of a celestial reward. The once serene environment of the commune was now charged with an undercurrent of fear and anticipation. The night before the ritual was marked by a palpable sense of dread. Elijah had summoned all his followers to the main hall of their communal home, a grand, albeit austere building that served as their place of worship and gathering. The hall was adorned with symbols and candles, casting flickering shadows that danced on the walls. Elijah stood at the front, his presence dominating the room. His eyes burned with a feverish intensity as he delivered what would become his final sermon. Tomorrow, Elijah declared, we will transcend this earthly existence. The time has come for us to shed our mortal coils and join the celestial choir. Our sacrifice will be the key to our salvation. We must be steadfast in our faith and resolute in our purpose. The followers, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the candles, responded with murmurs of agreement and tears of devotion. The sincerity in their eyes betrayed their inner turmoil, but the overwhelming pressure to conform silenced any doubts they might have had. Among them, Sarah clutched David's hand tightly, her knuckles white. David's face was a mask of grim acceptance, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his fear. Emily Cole sat quietly at the back, her expression a mixture of fear and confusion. She had begun to question the righteousness of Elijah's teachings, but felt trapped by the collective fervor and her own sense of obligation. The thought of leaving the commune and the repercussions of defying Elijah's command gnawed at her. As the night wore on, Elijah's final preparations were underway. He had instructed his followers to prepare for the ritual by writing letters to loved ones, ostensibly to offer final words of comfort and farewell. In reality, these letters were another tool of manipulation, ways to make the followers feel that their sacrifice was not just for themselves but for the greater good of others. By the time the sun began to set on the fateful day, the atmosphere in New Dawn was a mix of solemnity and fevered anticipation. The followers gathered in the main hall, once more, their eyes fixed on Elijah as he prepared to lead them in what he called the ceremony of ascendance. The hall was filled with an eerie calmness, punctuated only by the soft rustle of clothing and the quiet murmurs of the devoted. Elijah's voice rose to a crescendo as he began the final rites, his fervor reaching a fever pitch. Tonight we will leave behind our earthly bodies and embrace the divine light. This is the will of the celestial powers, and we are but instruments of their grand design. As the ceremony commenced, Elijah led the followers through a series of rituals, chanting, prayer, and the symbolic partaking of a concoction he claimed would purify their souls. The mood was somber, but filled with a twisted sense of peace. The followers, despite their inner turmoil, complied with unwavering devotion, unable to break free from the spell Elijah had cast over them. Unbeknownst to many, the final command was not merely a spiritual directive, but a sinister test of loyalty. Elijah had taken extreme measures to ensure compliance. Those who hesitated or showed signs of rebellion were dealt with harshly. Elijah's trusted enforcers, a select group of his most ardent followers, had already silenced those who tried to flee or question his authority. The final revelation was a horrifying testament to Elijah's manipulation and the destructive power of his charisma. As the evening wore on, the true extent of Elijah's command would become tragically clear, setting the stage for the devastating discovery that awaited the outside world. The seeds of doubt and fear sown among the followers would soon sprout into a harrowing tale of betrayal and sacrifice, leaving a dark stain on the once innocent landscape of redwood pines. The serene facade of new dawn shattered as the sun dipped below the horizon, giving way to a night that would soon be marked by unimaginable horror. Elijah Blackwood had meticulously orchestrated what he promised would be a transformative experience, a ritual that would elevate his followers to a divine realm. But beneath the surface of this grand promise lay a far more sinister reality. The commune, nestled deep in the Montana wilderness, was cloaked in the heavy darkness of early evening. The communal hall, where the final rites were to take place, was dimly lit by the flickering light of candles arranged in intricate patterns on the floor. The air was thick with a blend of incense and the faint, acrid scent of burning sage. Elijah stood at the head of the room, his presence commanding and almost otherworldly. His dark robes flowed as he moved, adding to his imposing figure. Sarah Mitchell had been among the most fervent believers in Elijah's teachings. Yet, as she prepared for the ritual, she could not ignore the nagging anxiety that gnawed at her. The night before, she had overheard a hushed conversation between Elijah and a few of his inner circle. The words "final purification" had been mentioned, terms that did not sit well with her. But her faith, coupled with the pressure of communal expectation, compelled her to suppress her growing fears. David, her husband, seemed to share her unease, though he kept it hidden behind a facade of stoic acceptance. He had tried to reason with Sarah, suggesting that perhaps Elijah's promises were not as divine as they seemed, but Sarah had reassured him with the certainty that their sacrifices were part of a greater plan. The couple, despite their doubts, found themselves swept along by the tide of collective belief and fear. Emily Cole, a new and impressionable member of the commune, had begun to grapple with her own doubts. The bright-eyed young woman, who had joined New Dawn, seeking solace, now found herself on the brink of a horrifying realization. She had witnessed Elijah's harsh punishments for dissenters and had seen the fear in the eyes of those who questioned the doctrine. As the ritual approached, Emily felt a paralyzing dread and wondered if there was any way to escape. The ceremony commenced with a solemn chant led by Elijah, his voice resonating with a powerful cadence that seemed to captivate every listener. The followers, dressed in ceremonial white robes, sat in a circle around a large, ornate altar at the center of the hall. The altar was adorned with symbolic artifacts, crystals, feathers, and a large, burning brazier that cast a deep orange glow. Elijah's ritualistic movements were mesmerizing, almost hypnotic, as he conducted the proceedings with a precision that spoke to his years of manipulation and control. At the center of the ritual was a sacramental drink, a concoction that Elijah claimed would purify their souls and prepare them for their ascent to the divine realm. The drink, A murky, foul-smelling liquid was passed around the circle, with each follower partaking in what they believed to be a sacred act. Sarah and David accepted the drink with trembling hands, their eyes locked on each other as they braced themselves for the unknown. Emily, sitting near the edge of the circle, hesitated. Her heart pounded as she watched the others drink, their faces reflecting a mixture of serene acceptance and underlying fear. She glanced around, noting the expressions of those who seemed resigned to their fate. With a deep breath and a sense of resigned determination, she took the cup and sipped, feeling the bitter liquid burn its way down her throat. As the ritual progressed, Elijah's demeanor grew more fervent. He moved around the circle, chanting louder, his eyes flashing with an almost frenzied light. His words became more urgent, imploring the followers to embrace the sacrifice with complete devotion. The atmosphere in the hall was charged with a palpable sense of inevitability, and the followers, despite their inner turmoil, complied with Elijah's every command. At some point during the ritual, the atmosphere shifted. What had started as a solemn ceremony turned into something more chaotic. The effects of the sacramental drink began to take hold: drowsiness, nausea, and disorientation. The followers' once steadfast resolve started to falter as the potent mixture began to induce hallucinations and a sense of detachment from reality. In the dim light, the scene grew increasingly disturbing. Sarah's once bright eyes were clouded with confusion, and she struggled to keep her focus. David's face was pale, his body trembling as he fought against the encroaching fog of the drug's effects. Emily, overwhelmed by a wave of panic, could hardly keep her composure. She looked around, trying to make sense of the growing chaos as some followers began to display signs of severe distress. It was at this moment that the true horror of Elijah's plan became evident. The ritual was not merely about transcendence. It was a means to ensure absolute compliance. Those who had shown signs of dissent or hesitation were targeted by Elijah's enforcers, loyalists who had been instructed to maintain control and silence any rebellion. The enforcers, clad in dark robes and masks, moved through the hall with a grim efficiency, their presence adding to the nightmarish atmosphere. Sarah, David, and Emily were not the only ones to witness the brutality. The enforcers, using intimidation and violence, began to subdue those who resisted. The sounds of muffled cries and desperate pleas filled the hall as Elijah's final command unfolded with terrifying precision. The once sacred ceremony had devolved into a scene of utter carnage. The followers, under the influence of the sacramental drink and their own fear, were powerless to resist. Some attempted to flee, but the enforcers quickly apprehended them, silencing their escape with ruthless efficiency. Elijah, meanwhile, continued to chant and pray, his voice rising above the din of the chaos, guiding his followers toward what he claimed was their divine ascension. As the night drew to a close, the hall was filled with the remnants of the ritual, the broken bodies of those who had been sacrificed, their faces etched with the final expressions of terror and resignation. The once grand altar was now a scene of devastation, its symbolic artifacts scattered and destroyed. Emily, in a moment of clarity amidst the chaos, managed to slip away from the circle. She stumbled through the darkened corridors of the commune, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and desperation. She knew she had to escape, to find help and reveal the horrifying truth of what had transpired. The next morning, as the first light of dawn broke over the Montana wilderness, the authorities were alerted to the grisly discovery at New Dawn. The scene they encountered was one of incomprehensible horror, a testament to Elijah Blackwood's dark and twisted vision. The mass suicide, intended to be a spiritual ascension, had instead become a harrowing testament to the lengths a charismatic leader would go to ensure his control. The investigation that followed would unravel the full extent of Elijah's manipulation and brutality, revealing a tale of desperation, betrayal, and sacrifice that would shock the world. The once sacred space of New Dawn was now a chilling reminder of the destructive power of blind faith and unchecked authority. In the days following the mass suicide at New Dawn, the quiet Montana landscape became a grim tableau of horror and tragedy. The once idyllic commune was now a scene of devastation, and the outside world began to grapple with the chilling reality of what had transpired within its borders. As news of the tragedy spread, an extensive investigation was launched, led by a dedicated team of federal agents and local law enforcement. The discovery of the crime scene had left them with more questions than answers, and the full scope of Elijah Blackwood's manipulations was yet to be uncovered. The first investigators to arrive were met with the haunting sight of the commune's main hall, littered with the lifeless bodies of Elijah's followers. The bodies were arranged in a grotesque tableau around the altar, their faces frozen in expressions of terror and resignation. The investigators, led by Special Agent Laura Hughes, a seasoned FBI operative, were struck by the sheer scale of the carnage and the apparent methodical nature of the massacre. Agent Hughes and her team meticulously combed through the scene, gathering evidence and documenting the horrors they encountered. Among the artifacts found were handwritten letters from the victims, notes that had been intended as final goodbyes to loved ones. These letters, which revealed the intimate fears and desperate hopes of the cult members, provided a chilling insight into the psychological control exerted by Elijah. As the investigation progressed, the authorities were able to piece together a disturbing picture of Elijah Blackwood's reign over New Dawn. The commune's records and witness testimonies painted a portrait of a man who had expertly used manipulation and psychological abuse to bend his followers to his will. It became clear that Elijah had not merely led his followers to their deaths. He had orchestrated their suffering with a calculated cruelty. Survivors who had managed to escape the commune played a crucial role in unraveling the truth. Emily Cole, who had narrowly escaped the massacre, was among the first to come forward. Her harrowing account provided a first-hand look at the psychological tactics Elijah had employed. She described how Elijah used fear, isolation, and emotional manipulation to control his followers. Her testimony was punctuated by her own trauma and the anguish of witnessing the brutality inflicted upon those who questioned the leader's authority. Emily's escape was nothing short of miraculous. After fleeing the commune, she had stumbled upon a remote ranger station and managed to contact the authorities. Her description of the events at New Dawn was detailed and chilling. She spoke of the forced consumption of the sacramental drink, the violent suppression of dissent, and the heart-wrenching moment when she realized the full extent of Elijah's plan. The authorities, deeply disturbed by Emily's account, began to search for more survivors and gather additional evidence. They discovered that many of the followers had been subjected to severe psychological abuse, including isolation from their previous lives, constant indoctrination, and physical punishment for non-compliance. It became evident that Elijah had meticulously crafted an environment of fear and dependency, making it nearly impossible for his followers to break free from his control. As the investigation continued, law enforcement uncovered further evidence of Elijah's manipulative tactics. Interviews with former members of the commune revealed a pattern of coercion and exploitation. Testimonies from former followers described how Elijah had gradually eroded their sense of self and replaced it with a blind, unshakable faith in his teachings. The revelations painted a picture of a man who had preyed on the vulnerable and used their desperation to build his own twisted vision of salvation. The final pieces of the puzzle fell into place as investigators uncovered the horrifying reality behind Elijah's final command. It was revealed that the sacramental drink, which had been presented as a holy elixir, was laced with a powerful sedative and a hallucinogen. The drug was intended to induce a state of compliance and disorientation, making it easier for Elijah's enforcers to control and subdue those who resisted. The investigation also revealed that Elijah had meticulously planned the mass suicide, ensuring that any potential dissenters were dealt with swiftly and ruthlessly. The enforcers, who had been loyal to Elijah, were found to have played a crucial role in the brutal suppression of those who attempted to escape or challenge the leader's authority. Their actions, while horrifying, were a testament to the extent of Elijah's control over his followers. The final act of the investigation involved piecing together Elijah Blackwood's background and motivations. It was discovered that he had a history of failed ventures and dubious religious claims before establishing New Dawn. His charismatic persona and calculated manipulation had allowed him to create a facade of divine authority, which he used to exploit his followers' vulnerabilities for his own gain. The culmination of the investigation brought a mixed sense of justice and sorrow. Elijah Blackwood, who had vanished in the wake of the massacre, was eventually found dead in the woods surrounding the commune. It was evident that he had taken his own life rather than face the consequences of his actions. The discovery of his body, though tragic, provided a grim sense of closure to the case. The aftermath of the tragedy had a profound impact on the community of Redwood Pines and the wider public. The story of New Dawn and Elijah Blackwood's reign of terror served as a stark reminder of the dangers of charismatic leaders who exploit their followers' faith and vulnerabilities. The survivors, including Emily Cole, were left to grapple with their trauma and seek a path to recovery. In the wake of the investigation, efforts were made to support the families of the victims and provide resources for those affected by the tragedy. The case also sparked discussions about the need for greater awareness and prevention of cultic manipulation and abuse. The legacy of New Dawn was one of profound horror and tragedy, but also of resilience and the power of truth. The investigation had uncovered the depths of Elijah Blackwood's depravity and the suffering endured by his followers. It served as a powerful reminder of the importance of vigilance and compassion in the face of exploitation and abuse. As the final chapter of the New Dawn case closed, the memory of those who had perished lingered as a solemn testament to the consequences of blind devotion and unchecked authority. The story of deadly devotion and Elijah Blackwood's final command became a haunting reflection on the fragility of faith and the strength required to confront the darkness that lies within.